Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera, and a very good afternoon to all. Thank you for taking your time this afternoon to join our webinar, which is titled SEJAHTERA and Gross National Happiness. I am Professor Emeritus Anwar Ali, the Pro-Chancellor of the University of SEJAHTERA, and will be the moderator this afternoon. Before we start, let me just highlight some of the housekeeping rules before we get to the talk later on. Your microphone will be automatically placed on mute during this session to avoid any interferences. You have any question throughout the webinar, please submit your question on the chat box. All questions hopefully will be addressed at the end of the session. And the slide and recording of today's session will be made available at the SMR website later on. First of all, let me welcome all the participants. And I believe beside our friends in Malaysia, there are a number of other countries that are involved or participating in this afternoon webinar, which is Australia. We have friends from Brunei, Bangladesh, Sudan, Belgium, India, and the United Kingdom. But more importantly, let me welcome our distinguished guest. I'm very honored to introduce this afternoon Professor Thakur Powdyel. He is an educator by choice, conviction, and passion. As the country's first democratically elected Minister of Education, he moved Bhutan, where he's from, towards fulfilling the country's constitutional mandate for education for all. His major interests include institutional integrity, national self-respect, moral literacy, and gross national happiness, which is, of course, the important issue that we will address us this afternoon. Professor Powdyel's vision of holistic education, as expressed in his book, My Green School, as I understand, been translated into several languages around the world. His other books include As I Am, So Is My Nation, Right of Vision and Occasional Views, Gal Cub, Reflection on State, Citizen and Citizenship, Education, and the Light of My Life. Professor Powdyel is a recipient of the International Gussie Peace Prize, Global Education Award, and Distinguished Service Award for his pioneering work in education, as well as the Coronation Gold Medal of 2008 and the Institutional Award, the honor of Drup Tuksay in 2012. Professor Powdyel invested his public office with a rare and chastening quality of integrity, service, and selflessness in the evolving Bhutanese democratic landscape in honor of his country and fellow citizens, born of his deeply held beliefs and convictions. Professor Powdyel has often been described as the most widely put travel education master in the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Professor Thakur ask Powdyel to share in this presentation this afternoon with us on SEJAHTERA and gross national happiness. Your Excellency, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Kuzazangpu and Salam SEJAHTERA. Thank you so much for this very generous introduction, Tan Sri Ali. I would like to begin by acknowledging all the venerable Tan Sris, esteemed Datus, excellencies, scholars of the University of Cyberjaya, Asia Metropolitan University, members of the academic community, my fellow educators, students, and participants from different parts of the world. This is such a humbling experience for me to be invited to share a few thoughts on these themes, which are indeed too large for me, yet as a passionate advocate, particularly of gross national happiness, and a firm believer in the promise of SEJAHTERA, it is my honor to present before you some of my very humble reflections based on my own limited understanding of these two very large themes. Gross national happiness has been an important theme of national development for Bhutan. And one of my more recent discoveries has been a kindred spirit of SEJAHTERA. And I see a very close proximity between the two ideals of human and societal development. I would like to begin by sharing a few of my slides. And here I presented for your viewing this little image of a man looking at the North Star. In Bhutan, we don't have any sea or ocean, but we have the mountains. So we look at the North Star from the high mountains, from the rocks. I was in Port Dickson, and during 2 days there, I often imagined myself looking across the Strait of Malacca, far beyond, to the vast horizon, trying to locate the North Star. And in my own mind, I told myself, SEJAHTERA could be the North Star for Malaysia. So, as my esteemed audience would know, long ago, before humanity invented the precision equipment that we have today to locate precise places on the globe, sailors and mariners lost on the wide open seas looked at the North Star. Because the North Star was a point of reference, it would guide them to the safety of the port. So the sailors and the mariners looked at the North Star and moved in the direction of the safety of the port, guided by the North Star. In the 21st century, when everybody is so busy with state-of-the-art equipment, when everything is available on the palm of their hands, people may not have time or the inclination to look at the North Star. But I firmly believe that even today in the 21st century, we need the North Star. In fact, more so now than ever before. We live in a visionless world. Thanks to the genius of humanity, we have made tremendous progress in the objective world, in the material world, but in the march of human civilization along the way, we also lost what I might call the North Star. That's why we run helter skelter, not knowing where humanity must head towards. That's why I believe that this North Star is very important for our societies, for our nations, just as indeed human beings, all men, women, and children, need a dream to guide them in the direction of the future that they want to move towards. So, I would like to invite all of you, my esteemed members of the audience, to look at the North Star and reflect on what might be the function of this North Star. I believe all nations need a North Star. All societies, all nations need a North Star. And for Bhutan, the North Star was, in fact, identified by His Majesty the Fourth King, Dugyalpo Jigme Singye Wangchuk, when he was a very young king. And the North Star for me is an eternal metaphor for our goal, metaphor for the destiny that we all are after. So, looking for the North Star is an invitation that we extend to ourselves, extend to succeeding generations of our children, and to humanity. We are so busy, and as the great poet William Wordsworth mentioned, our life is so full of care that we have no time to stand and stare. But if we have no time to stand and stare, if we have no time to reflect on what might be the goal of life, what is the ultimate goal of life? Why are we here on this earth? Why were we born? What were the purpose of our life? Was it to make money, to get rich, to own, to possess a lot of property? Or was it to find enlightenment, to find salvation, to serve humanity, to improve the condition of our mother earth? What might be the goal of life? And moving on, all governments all around the world make their annual plans, 5-year plans, short-term plans, medium-term plans, long-term plans. Why do they do that? They say it is for development. But what is the goal of development? Is it to increase material prosperity? Is it to build institutions? Is it to build infrastructure? Is it to compete with other nations in the world, with other people, with other communities? Is it to improve the material conditions of life? What is development? Is it only what the eyes can see? Or is there also development that the eyes cannot see, but the mind can register and the heart can feel? What is authentic, real development? In the conventional model, governments looked at development by looking at gross domestic product, the sum total of goods and services produced in the country. So development meant high GDP, and that is it. It didn't matter how that how revenue was produced or created, how material progress was made possible. So that was the GDP model. In the GDP model, there is this obsession with the growth, growth and more growth, production and consumption, more production and more consumption without an end. So production and consumption becomes the sum total of lives. But how that production is made possible, what is the impact of that consumption, GDP doesn't bother about. What does consumption, what kind of impact consumption has on the planet, on, uh, on the environment, GDP doesn't bother about. As long as there is exchange of goods and services, an increase in material well-being, that is success, that is progress, that is development in the GDP model of development. But somewhere towards the end of the 1970s of the last century, a young king in Bhutan, His Majesty Jigme Singha Wangchuk, still a young prince, 16 going on 17, decided that there was something wrong, something inadequate with this GDP model of development. Life is should life is not all about production and consumption. Life is more than production and consumption. The cycle of life should not be limited to that. So if you want to get an authentic view of development, if the government, if the society wants to achieve a real authentic development or progress, we have to look at beyond material goods and services. We have to look beyond the tangibles and the quantifiables and the non-material elements, which are equally, if not more important, to give us a sense of well-being, to give us a sense of authentic and fulfilling development. He called it gross national happiness. His Majesty, the fourth king, Dugyalpa Jigme Singha Wangchuk, decided that GDP did not tell the whole story. It told only a part of the story. So if we want a fuller view of development, if we want a more holistic and sustainable sense of development, we have to broaden the base. We need more variables to give us a proper sense of development. He called it gross national happiness. And over the past 4.5 decades or so, gross national happiness has been something like our North Star. We do our development planning, our policy making, monitoring of implementation of our development plans by using the yardstick of gross national happiness rather than depending fully on the yardstick of GDP. So over the past 45 years or so, gross national happiness has been something like our North Star. His Majesty, the fourth king, decided that Bhutan ought to have uh, an alternative vision of progress. Bhutan ought to develop an alternative paradigm beyond GDP. At the time when His Majesty articulated the vision of gross national happiness, Bhutan was still struggling even to meet our basic needs of the population. And there was this demand from the world beyond to assess how Bhutan was doing in terms of per capita income. In fact, a journalist asked His Majesty when he was returning from the non-alignment summit in Havana. At the airport, a journalist asked His Majesty, "Your Majesty, what is the per capita income of your people?" His Majesty immediately replied, "We do not believe in per capita income. We do not believe in gross domestic product. What we believe in is how happy the people are." Then was born this idea of gross national happiness as an alternative paradigm, a counterforce to the conventional reductionistic utilitarian economics efficiency based logic of development. And gross national happiness as a new vision of development is much more holistic, much more sustainable, a lot more sensitive. It takes care of the needs of the present generation while at the same time looking at what might be the impact of today's activities to the life and well-being of succeeding generations of our people. So this is how His Majesty articulated this holistic alternative vision of development for Bhutan way back in the late 1970s. And we believe that gross national happiness is founded on these pillars. We call them pillars. If we look at gross national happiness as as a structure, that architecture of gross national happiness is supported by these four pillars. These could be considered as the enabling conditions or the environment. The first pillar is balanced and equitable socio-economic development, because all around the world today, a lot of unhappiness, a lot of disappointment, a lot of frustration comes from either a real or a perceived sense of inequity. The opportunities, the resources in the society are not equitably distributed. Development opportunities are not equitably distributed. Estimates show that 1% of the people control the big lion's share of the resources of the country, and the vast majorities is left to fend for themselves with the leftovers after the lion's share has been usurped by the what what um, what Darwin would call the fittest in the society. Fittest in a different sense of the term. Fittest in terms of being able to exploit more and own and possess more. So we believe that it is the responsibility of elected governments to make sure that development and opportunities are fairly equitably distributed amongst the people in the society. We we enjoy the benefits of development together, and and if we if we are not doing so well, even adversity is shared experience. So, bringing about this balanced and equitable socio-economic development is an important aspect of gross national happiness and conservation of the environment. Today, we are talking about global warming, we're talking about climate change, we're talking about mass movements of people, we're talking about the natural environment being polluted, water becoming undrinkable in many parts of the world, air becoming unbreathable, desertification taking place at a very rapid pace, snow melt causing causing rise in the level of the sea, and it may not take very long for some of the countries to go underwater, and this global warming affecting everybody, mass movements of people, migration, and animals, flora and fauna suffering as a result. So at the end of the day, if human beings are not able to take care of planet Earth, Mother Nature, Mother Nature will hit back. So it is the responsibility of governments to make sure that policies are made properly so that the sustainability of planet Earth is taken care of. And if planet Earth is taken care of properly, Mother Nature will take care of human beings. And Mother Nature will take care not only of us, the present generation, but Mother Nature will take care of succeeding generations of people. For Bhutan, culture and tradition, our heritage are very important, as indeed for all cultures. Malaysia, any country in the world, culture is important. Culture is our point of reference, where we came from, who we are, what makes us who we are, how did we get the way we are, what have been those great foundations of our society, the foundations of our race, the foundations of our communities. How did our society get to be the way that it is now? How did we start dressing the way we do? How did we start preparing the kind of food and drinks the way we do? The way we build our homes, our structures, our songs and dances, our sports and games, our music, our art and architecture, our songs, our the way we respect our elders, the way we relate to each other, our worldview, our orientation, our our understanding of right and wrong, our understanding of good and bad, our understanding of truth and false. How did we get to be the way we are? How do we dress the way we are? How do we speak the language the way we do, see? How do we conduct our ceremonies, our customs, our rites and rituals, our superstitions, our beliefs, our faith? All these are a function of our culture. See? The way we proclaim to the world who we are. And how did we get the way we are? See? How did the Malaysian society get to be the way it is? How did the Bhutanese society get to be the way it is? What makes us Bhutanese? What makes the Malays Malaysians? See? Malaysians Malaysians? See? How did we, what is it? What gives us our identity? What gives us our sense of belonging? What gives us that sense of confidence to say that this is who we are? See, culture is extremely important, not only for Bhutan, but for all societies, for all nations. Culture. This is our sense of rootedness. This gives us our integrity. This gives us our sense of who we are, where we belong. See, how do we look at the world? How do people know who we are? See, that is culture. And of course, the fourth pillar is governance. Governance cuts across all the other pillars. Governance is pervasive. Good governance can support all the other pillars. If the government is good, it will bring about balanced and equitable socio-economic development. If governance is good, it will take care of our natural environment. It will not allow exploitation and destruction of our natural environment in the name of development. Good governance will take care of culture. So good governance is about service. It's about um, it's about taking care of people, taking care of every other element. So that's why these pillars are extremely important for gross national happiness. And today, a lot of the countries around the world believe that these pillars are critical for sustainable development, for long-term holistic development, not only for Bhutan, but for all countries. Who doesn't aspire for equity and balanced opportunities? Who doesn't care for the integrity of the environment, a culture, governance? So these are basic, these are fundamental and broad-based. So as opposed to GDP, which is only about economic development or material development, gross national happiness is about a broad based, sustainable, holistic development paradigm. So, these are the four pillars I talked to you earlier about. And we break these four pillars down to also these nine domains. The nine domains are important because the four pillars on their own have to be made intelligible. And how do we make real the operation of the four pillars? So the nine domains constitute constituted by living standards. So all people need basic minimum security, economic security, material security. We need food, shelter, and clothing. We need communication. When we are sick, we need we need medical service. We want to be educated. We want our children to be educated. We want a basic we want our basic minimum material economic comforts ensured. So that is something that all governments have to try and make sure. And psychological well-being. For example, in GDP doesn't bother about whether people are psychologically well off. People are psychologically, in fact, in a good state of mind. Health is important. Education is important. The condition of how one feels. So being in good health or enjoying good health is a very important condition for happiness or for well-being. And we found out that education is an important contributor to well-being. And time use is another factor. For example, of the 24 hours that we have to a day, how do we use those 24 hours? Are we only stuck in our offices in our productive mode? Or do we also have time for reflection? Do we have time for celebrations? Do we have time for our families? Do we have time for prayers and for meditation? Do we have time to go for a walk? Do we have time to visit our relatives? Do we have time for music, for fun, for art? Do we have time to go to the museums? Do we have time to go for a celebration? Do we have time to volunteer, to do volunteer work? How do we divide that 24 hours that we have with us? So time use is very important. Do we spend time in our prayers, in our meditation? Or are we only engaged in our active, productive part in our offices? Do we have time for our families, for our children, for our near and dear ones? When there's a celebration, do you have time for that? When somebody dies, do you have time to go and uh, lend our ears, lend a helping hand? So time use is very important. Cultural diversity and resilience, I mentioned earlier on. So how resilient is the culture? And do we respect diversity, plurality of cultures? Because culture today is so diverse. And do we respect each other? Do we celebrate each other? Do we honor each other? That is culture. Good governance, of course, I talked about. Community vitality. Community is so important because at the end of the day, when we need, when we are in need, it is the community, it is our friends, our neighborhood. How active is our neighborhood? For example, during the COVID times, all around the world, we saw great examples of volunteerism. People coming out to share what they have, caring and sharing, the spirit of volunteerism. That is what makes the community strong. When somebody is in need, we go and help. When there's a moment of celebration, we are together again. See. So, cultural vitality. How do cultures survive? See? That's important. Ecological diversity and resilience. The integrity of the ecologies. Do we destroy our environment in the name of development, in the name of progress? Or do we respect the natural environment, care for the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the vegetation, the animals, the birds, the plants, all those different species with which we share our lives? We human beings are just one microcosm of the big macrocosm of this planet Earth. Do we have that sensitivity? Do we mind that? Do we mind our relationship with Mother Earth? How do we treat Mother Earth? How do we treat nature? Is it a resource to be exploited and used up in our generation? Or is it something that we have to honor and respect? If we honor and respect Mother Earth will help us, take care of us. We will, succeeding generations will be able to enjoy the bountifulness, the beneficence of Mother Earth. So these 9 domains are further broken down into indices, into which I'll not go now, but these are important. And for any society, for any country, I would believe that these are important. Living standard is important. Psychological well-being is important. Health is important. excuse me. As you know, in GDP calculation, excuse me, in GDP calculation, many of these things don't matter. GDP doesn't bother about whether you're praying or whether you're volunteering. GDP doesn't bother about cultural diversity, a culture of riches. GDP doesn't about ecology or the integrity of our environment. GDP will be happy if we can cut down all the trees, mine all the oceans, use up all the resources, increase revenue, multiply the resources. That is GDP. But that is highly irresponsible and thoughtless. It will use up all the resources now. Because GDP's calculation is only in terms of measurables, in terms of quantifiables, not in terms of those non-quantifiable issues. For example, His Majesty the Fourth King realized that at the end of the day, at the end of the day, all human beings all over the world, across time and space, share one common denominator. That is that, irrespective of time and place, whichever parallel and meridian, whichever continent, whichever country, whichever country, whichever location we are in, it doesn't matter. Wherever we are, one thing is common. We all want to be happy. We all want to be happy. There's no human being who doesn't want to be happy. So if this the basic desire of all human beings, if it is the most fundamental yearning of all human beings, governments must realize this and create those conditions for people to be able to enjoy that sense of well-being and happiness. And these are the important conditions. There could be more or there could be fewer, but we believe that this is important for people to be able to enjoy, experience a sense of well-being and happiness. And these are the 9 domains that I already talked about, but this is a kind of a different representation. The 9 domains that support the 4 pillars of gross national happiness. And His Majesty the current King, Dukyalpo Jimmy Gesa Namgi Mochum, is a very firm believer of gross national happiness. And His Majesty believes that gross national happiness is as simple as development with values. GDP doesn't bother about values. GDP bothers only about getting more for less. It bothers about measurables and quantifiables. It bothers about materials. It doesn't bother about whether something is good or bad, whether it is conscionable, whether this is right or wrong, whether it's true or false, whether it's good or bad. That is not the domain of GDP. But if we mean by anything by development, it has to be development with values, care for each other, care for the planet, care for future generations. Consider what suits human beings, what makes human beings, and how do we look after each other? How do we govern ourselves? How do we live our lives? How do we survive and also allow others to survive? So GDP in the language of His Majesty the King is development with values. And I see that SEJAHTERA is something like the twin brother of GNH. SEJAHTERA, this 2,000-year-old Malaysian vision of human development, societal development, human progress has these basic foundations. At the end of the day, who we are, what makes us who we are, see? What is important in life, see? What is development? What makes development holistic and integrated and harmonious? Does development come at the cost of planet Earth? Does development come at the cost of my neighbor or the other country or the other community? Does it come at the cost of the integrity of planet Earth? This old Malaysian vision of development honors and celebrates these fundamental relationships. The relationship between the human and the natural. Respect for planet Earth, as I understand it, is germane, fundamental to the notion of SEJAHTERA. And human beings will only survive when planet Earth survives. Our survival, our success depends upon the survival of the macrocosm that is our natural environment. Our seas, our land, our skies, all these, and the integrity of all these different realms is so very important for our integrity. Our integrity comes from the integrity of Mother Nature, from the integrity of the oceans, the integrity of our land, the integrity of the air, the integrity of the sky. What have we done? What have we done as human beings? Supposed to be the most highly evolved of all the human beings, of all the species, of all the species. The human of the species is supposed to be the most highly evolved. That's why we are called the Homo sapiens, thinking beings, rational beings. But do we think? Are we rationals? Do we care for others enough? Do we share enough? Do we care for the water? Do we care for the ocean, for the sea? Do we care for the soil enough? Do we care for vegetation, for the trees, for the flora, for the fauna, for everything that is there that makes us who we are, that supports us? Or do we exploit it in our time, increase our per capita income, our revenue, and say that our society, our country is doing very well. This is the amount of money we have in our banks. This is the per capita income. Is that real development? So real development comes from taking care of each other, taking care of our neighborhoods, taking care of this planet Earth. This is how interdependent we are. The balance between the material and the spiritual. As I understand it, SEJAHTERA is deeply concerned about this balance between the human and the material. Material goods are necessary. As the old Japanese would say, material goods are necessary. They are important, but they do not last 1,000 years. Material goods have a limit. There is a limit to material development, material production, material consumption. What is important is cultivating and enriching, recognizing our spiritual domain, spiritual dimension. Whether we like it or not, all of us human beings, all of us are spiritual in one way or the other. I do not mean religious. Religiosity or religion is different from spirituality. Spirituality is profounder. It is bigger. Spirituality lifts you. It elevates us. It gives us a sense of worth. It gives us a sense of purpose and fullness. Spirituality elevates us, it edifies us. Religion or religiosity could sometimes make us small. So spirituality elevates us. So what we need as the human of the species is not only material goods that satisfy our basic needs. We need bread. Without bread, we cannot live. But bread alone is not enough to live our lives meaningfully and purposefully in a worthwhile way. See. We need to cultivate, we need to recognize that at the end of the day, we are spiritual beings. What is spirituality after all? Spirituality is a recognition, is an acknowledgement of the fact that as we are not complete. As we are not full. As we are not perfect. But there is something higher than us, something nobler, something sublimer, something more divine than us. And we as human beings, as limited as we are, we have to tend towards those noble, sublime, and more realized objects. They could be God, they could be the spirit of nature, they could be our great ancestors, they could be our leaders who we respect, who we honor. So, spirituality is that tendency, that impulse in us that elevates us. Materialism at times degrades us. Materialism can degrade us, but spirituality can elevate us. So, how do we combine? How do we find the middle path between materialism and spirituality? Gross national happiness as a development paradigm seeks to bring about this balance. And as I understand it, Sejahtera does that as well. What do we count as real development? It is this balance between the needs of the body and the needs of the mind, the claims of the hearts. So the development, so cultural development and social development, they go together. So how rich are we? What can we claim to be ours? What can we claim to be our root? The sense of our belonging, our identity. So our social graces, our social relationships, our human bonds, sense of belonging, one for all for one, our culture. These are important. And as you know, Sejahtera is it makes a departure from GDP because society, culture are not much of relevance to the GDP, the GDP model of developments. But Sejahtera model, the GNH model, take care of these important variables that give us a, a more holistic vision of development, a much more entire, a much more complete and harmonious sense of development. And I see that just as we have the 9 domains, Sejahtera has these domains as well. And Venerable Tanshi Zul talks about spices. And these spices, the, the, the spices, they are something like the 9 domains of GDP. And here we're talking about ecological integrity. And I see that in Malaysia, there's a very wide awakening now of the need to preserve the integrity of planet Earth. When I was in a beautiful country a year and a half ago, I realized how there is this newfound awakening of the need to preserve the integrity of the natural beauty of your countries. So ecological integrity, social harmony, cultural wisdom, economic well-being. I see that these are something like these are something like the 4 pillars, and the 4 pillars. In fact, here in the Sejahtera, framework, I see that we have the we have these pillars: the ecological pillar, the economic pillar, the societal social pillar, the culture pillar, and these these domains inside. These are important. For example, how do people feel emotionally is not a concern of GDP. How smart they are intellectually, excuse me, spiritually, ethically. Ethical concerns, ethical concerns are not. Sorry, no, I think I messed up somewhere. Let me go back. So, um, in terms of SEJAHTERA, I see that I'm sorry about this. Um, I see that in SEJAHTERA, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. The SEJAHTERA elements, those four pillars I showed earlier on, and and these are other elements, the social element, physio-psychological, emotional, intellectual, cognitive, ethical, spiritual, together with the four elements, economic, ecological, cultural, societal. These together for me constitute the, the domains that we call as such in GDP. So I see a very close resemblance, in fact, a link between what we call gross national happiness and the SEJAHTERA model of development. And how do we take this forward? How do we take gross national happiness forward? How do we take SEJAHTERA forward? I believe it's very important to engage the resources of this extremely important sector. I call it the noble sector, education. Education is so pervasive. Everybody has a stake in it, right from His Majesty the King to the person working on the road, the child. All generations have a stake in education. And I see that the highly developed Malaysian education system is also, in fact, a celebration. It acknowledges the wisdom of the past, but also looks at innovation, enterprise, IT, and technology. So, how do we combine the two so that we get the best of the old and the new? So, I see that Malaysia has made a wonderful use of this extremely important instrument of human flourishing and societal development. And I feel it should not be education as it is understood today. Education has been understood in so many ways around the world today. There's so much going on in the name of education, but not all of it has much to do with education. But education ought to be more than getting a degree, completing a course, getting a degree or a diploma, and carving out a career. These are important, but education must be much more than that. It ought to be much more purposeful. It ought to be much more authentic. It ought to have integrity. Then it becomes the noble sector. How does it become noble? Does it elevate the minds? Does it open the mind? Or does it constrict the minds? Does the mind open? Is the mind open to new ideas, new knowledge, new information? Does it accept new ideas? Does it welcome new thought? Does the mind open? The great Nobel laureate of India, Rabindranath Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore talks about knowledge, knowledge that allows the head to be lifted, and where knowledge is not lost into the dreary desert sands of dead habits, where knowledge is, where the mind is free, where the mind is free and the head is held high. Knowledge, education, does knowledge do that? So this is what I mean by education. Sorry. And so how do we use education? I have to go back. Right. Mr. Vinesh, I think might need your help.
Sure, Your Excellency. Just give me a minute.
Sorry. How do I go back to my...
Yeah, you can just press your arrow button. You can press behind.
So I see that, okay, I'm here. Can you see this slide?
Yes.
Okay, so I see education as the primary instrument for human and societal flourishing. We would like to use this term flourishing. We don't hear it often enough. Flourishing. How does the society flourish? The society flourishes through human flourishing, because the society is who I am, who we are. So we make the society. So when the citizens flourish, when our young people flourish, the society flourishes. The society flourishes. The nation flourishes. Of all the nations of the world flourish, if all the nations of the world flourish, in the real authentic sense of the term, the world flourishes. So in our new education, in fact, in paradigm, we would like the head and the heart and the hands to engage. Today's education is too intellectual, too mentalistic. But human beings are more than the head. The head is there, it's important, but we want to combine the head and the heart and the hands. Emotional quotient is as important, or maybe even more important than intellectual quotient. We have to look at education as the noble sector. If the aim of the society is as noble as SEJAHTERA, if the aim of the society is as noble as GNH, or gross national happiness, education as the important instrument ought to be elevated. We have to change the language of discourse. The language that we use today to talk about education is not respectable enough. It is not elevated enough. It is not it is not graceful enough. We are using the language of factories and corporations and of the marketplace. That is not how education ought to be. The language of education ought to be a little more elevated, a little more respectable. Then only education can lead the society, can lead the market. Today, I'm often very disappointed when we are told that you have to fulfill the requirements of the employment market. Is very important. That's important. Employment market has its needs, and those needs have to be met by our educational institutions. But that is not the sole purpose of education. If we're able to educate our people properly, they will be able to guide the market. They'll be able to guide the society. They'll become good leaders. They'll become good citizens, policymakers. And I think that's where we are. We have to elevate education to the noble sector that it was. And in Bhutan, we made a small effort we launched a big program called Educating for Gross National Happiness in 2009. Because if the nation has a big dream, if the nation has a North Star, we have to look at the same North Stars. We have to share the dream. And education is an extremely important segment of the society, of the nation. So education ought to do its part to share in the dream and take the dream forward. See. That's why we launched this National Education Reform Initiative called Educating for Gross National Happiness. And the instrument, the strategy that we used was Green School. And Green School is a Green School is a very is expansive. It is not just about schools and education and colleges and universities. My Green School is about life. It's about learning. It's about our planet Earth. It's about our environment. So green is a metaphor. Green is a color, but more than a color, it is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for anything and everything that supports and sustains life. And life in all its multiple forms: human life, animal life, plant life, bird life, life in the sea, life on land, life in the air, and everywhere in between. So anything that supports and sustains life is green. So we can have a green school that supports life in learning. We can have a green college that supports life in learning. We can have a green university that supports life in learning. We can have a green government, green parliament, green judiciary, green business, green economics, green architecture, green society that is pro-life, pro-learning, pro-planet, pro-nature. See. This is what I feel education ought to do. So when I'm looking at SEJAHTERA, when I'm looking at GNH, Gross National Happiness, we want to elevate education to be a worthy instrument for the advancement of these big goals. And at the end of the day, we would like a harmony, harmony between the rational mind and the affective heart, the yin and yang principles, the golden mean. This I also believe is the SEJAHTERA principle. So I feel that if I'll come back to this. So here, so my green school, as I was talking about, my green school has 8 elements. These are something like the 8 claims. 8 claims. Today we set up a school, we set up a college or a university. We do not really reflect on why do we set it up? Why do we set it up? Why do we set up a school? Why do we set up a college or a university? What is the big aim? What is the big purpose? What difference are we going to make? Whose claims are we going to serve by setting up a school, by setting up a college or a university? Whose claim are we serving? Are we serving the claim of humanity? Are we serving the claim of planet Earth? Are we serving the claim of the society, the government, the business community, the factories? Whose claim are we serving? Are we serving the claim of truth? Are we serving the claim of ethics? Are we serving the claim of morality? Are we serving the claim of cultures? Claim of the society? Claim of knowledge? Claim of spirituality? Claim of aesthetics? So my green school has these important claims. And if we are able to conceptualize and structure education along these lines, I feel we will have a much more worthwhile and purposeful education system. So the first element of my green school is the natural element. Then I have the social element. Then there is the cultural element, the intellectual element, the aesthetic element, the the academic element, aesthetic element, the spiritual element, and above all, the moral element or the ethical element. So a green school has these 8 elements. And if we are able to think of education and take into account the claims of these important elements, the claim of planet Earth, natural element, the claim of the society, the claim of culture, the claim of the mind, the claim of academics, studies, great fields of knowledge, the claim of aesthetics, love of things that are graceful and beautiful, what is beautiful and graceful and tasteful, the claim of ethics. So this is my green school, and I believe that if the head and the heart can work together, if we can find a golden mean, I think SEJAHTERA will be served. Gross national happiness will be served. And at the end of the day, as an educator, I am a man of hope. I'm a man of faith. Things are not perfect, but they can be made better. The world is not a perfect place, but with all its imperfections, it is still a good place. Life is not perfect, but with all its aches and pains, it is still beautiful. We have to preserve it. We have to work to make it better. That's why I believe with the Tan Sri Zul, Venerable Tan Sri Zul, another world is possible. So Sejatra is a way to that world, a world that we wish to see evolve. The gross national happiness is the vision of a world that we wish to build. So I think I took much longer than I should have. May have run into the question answer time, but thank you so much for your patience and participation. I would like to wish all of you the very best. But if there are some questions and if there's still some time, I would like to welcome them. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We have really enjoyed your most wonderful talk. You have spent slightly over an hour, but nevertheless, to me, and I'm sure the participant will agree, that was an excellent exposition of the gross national happiness in Bhutan, the pillars of the gross national happiness, the domain, and it was beautifully connected to the SEJAHTERA vision that was mentioned to you as exposed by Tan Sri Zul from here. But more importantly, I think due to your experience and being a committed educationist, you were once the Minister of Education of Bhutan. The passion that you show with respect to the importance of education. I always believe that education has 3 important pillars, and that suits into what you said. One is the primary education, the other primary and school education, higher education, and lifelong education.
Yes,
Meaning, like everybody else, we are learning today what's happening in Bhutan. And ladies and gentlemen, 2 days ago, I had a little chat with Your Excellency, and I told him that I was in Bhutan, but that was 30 years ago.
Yes, indeed.
And I learned from there that His Excellency King Wangchuk IV
Yes.
introduced the Gross Happiness Index
That was the
sometime
time.
in the early 70s, as you correctly mentioned. So let me just inform you that we have almost or slightly over 200 participants this afternoon.
Oh, what
And
an honor.
I'm sure they'll be pleased if they can give you some question. But
I'll be so happy
nevertheless,
there.
I'm not sure whether we can have the time to do it. But let me just choose a few questions.
Please.
And we would like Your Excellency to elaborate on those questions.
Yeah, I'll try and be short.
Let me see. There are about 30 over questions, and I'm not sure where I should go. Let me see. Most of them are thanking you, Your Excellency. But let me just pick one question from Dr. Jalesio. He's from the University of SEJAHTERA. What do you think is the most difficult challenges faced by mankind, especially the youth of today, in the preservation of culture? Your Excellency?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this extremely important question. I think that was one of the reasons why in my green school, one of the important elements is cultural greenery. Cultural greenery. We see that young people all over the world, irrespective of which country they are in, young people are the same all over the world. They want to experiment, they want to venture out, they want to explore. And when they venture out, they discover things which are much more exciting, much more much more attractive to them sometimes than what they are born into. But it is also the responsibility of the parents, the academic community, our institutions, to keep them well rooted into the culture. But because at the end of the day, even young people have to find some sense of where they come from, who they are, what makes them who they are. So I feel that if we are able to get to explain to young people why we need to be sensitive to the value of culture as an anchor, it is an emotional anchor, a psychological anchor, and indeed it is a life anchor. And I think many young people do not get to know the value of culture from deep within. That is why sometimes they get put off when people talk about culture and tradition. They feel that these are only for old people, for the elders, and not for them. I think culture has an intergenerational relevance. And I think getting the young people to understand this is a challenge, but they are also very positive reinforcement. And they also want to contribute what they can to the enrichment of the culture as much as they benefit from it, as much as they want to explore and venture out. So I think it falls upon us, the elders, to explain to young people the value of culture from a much more authentic standpoint. So they'll come along, they'll come around. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. There's another question which I like to pose from Mr. Johnny Ng. His question is, how do you quantify and measure the gross national happiness? Is there a kind of performance indicators? What's your thought on this, Your Excellency?
This is an extremely important question that I receive a lot of the time. I would like to share a small little story of Saint Augustine. St. Augustine was asked once, "What is time?" And the answer was very interesting. "As long as you don't ask me what is time, I know what it is. The moment you ask me what time is, I don't know it." In the same way, I feel GNH is a departure from the conventional measure of development using the yardstick of GDP, gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is about measures, it's about quantification, it's about economic quantities, material quantities that can be counted. And GDP believes that what cannot be counted doesn't count. What cannot be measured doesn't have value. But GNH goes beyond GDP. Of course, we have to have some scientific measures to assess GNH. So even though we believe that we should not we should not coerce GNH to lend itself to measurement. However, we also have to satisfy the statisticians, the economists, the scientists. So what we have is we have what is called in Bhutan the Center for Bhutan Studies and GNH Research. The Center for Bhutan Studies and GNH Research, it carries out surveys every 2 years or 3 years. Every 2 to 3 years, the GNH Center, the Center for Bhutan Studies, carries out a survey using a wide range of test items, almost 200 items, statistical tools they use. They begin from the 4 pillars, go to the 9 domains, then 32 indicators, then 200 indices. So all these are broken down uh, into test items, questionnaires, and they go around the country. So they look at a large sample size from people from across the country, 20 Dzongkhaks districts, and they do the assessment and do the analysis and make the findings available to the government. And the government then accordingly makes plans and policies. Which district is doing better on the GNH indicators? Which category of people are doing better? The employed ones or the unemployed ones? The married people or the unmarried ones? The townsfolk or the villages? Which level, the old people or the young people? So there are the educated or uneducated ones, the government civil servants, or other people who are in the private sector. So the this Center for Bhutan Studies actually uses a lot of these statistical tools to assess the level of well-being and happiness of the people. So some districts do better than others, and accordingly the government will have to make plans to address what is lacking in those areas. So this is not a perfect tool, but we do use some scientific methods and tools to assess where our country stands, where different districts stand in relationship to happiness.
Thank you very much. Maybe if you can answer one more question, perhaps, because of time constraint.
Yes,
is that
I
okay,
will.
Your Excellency?
Yes, please. Absolutely.
This question relates to what you mentioned in the last part of your talk, which is about the importance of religion and spirituality. So the question comes from Mr. Ramasamy Mohandas. His question is, how important is religion and spirituality in the gross national happiness equation? Your Excellency?
Thank you so much for this very important question again. Spirituality is extremely important. So we look at spirituality or religion within the pillar of culture. So, and Bhutan is a deeply spiritual country. It is a deeply inward-looking country, and spirituality is an extremely important part of life. So our country is dotted with lahangs, temples, prayer flags. In fact, Honorable Tansri would have seen those in Thimphu and Paro areas. So our mountains, our valleys are dotted with the prayer flags, the small stupas and the big monasteries. Our monks are all over the place. And we have the head of the spiritual tradition, the chief abbot, His Holiness, the Jekhimpom, and highly realized masters who practice our religion. So religion, spirituality, these are extremely important part of gross national happiness. And one thing that binds all the Buddhist people together is that young and old, men and women, all people are very spiritually oriented. So it's an extremely important part of our life, and it's extremely important in GNH as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Probably being the chairman of the session today, I may have the privilege or honor to ask you one little question.
Maybe one big one.
Maybe I've seen some of the question, and they refer to globalization and the what do you call the role of foreign investment, foreign trade, international trade, and so on. How do you see this, Your Excellency? How does it impact your country particularly and the subcontinent in India, Pakistan, and so on?
Thank you so much. This is a very important question again. And thank you so much for raising this, Venerable Tanshri. For a long time, till about the middle of the last century, Bhutan remained in what we call self-imposed isolation. That period of self-imposed isolation was a difficult policy, but it was a very wise policy that our kings followed. It allowed that policy of self-imposed isolation allowed Bhutan to maintain its unique heritage and tradition and custom, and more importantly, its sovereignty. We were not thrown into the maelstrom of the big world wars and the regional conflicts and all those. And when um, when Bhutan started opening up, especially in the middle of the last century, it took very measured, gradual steps to open up. And the third king, His Majesty Dugyalpo Jignis Dorji Wangchuk, who we call the father of modern Bhutan, brought in modern education, English medium education. He realized that just as important as it is to maintain a culture and tradition, our identity, our uniqueness, we also have to be a member of the global community. We have to play our part as a member of the global community. So it took Bhutan to be a member of the United Nations organization in 1972. And of course, he passed away before he was actually able to see the fruit of his work. But modern education, science, and mathematics, in fact, were actually his gift to Bhutan. And today, Bhutan is a member of the United Nations organization, the non-alignment movement, the SARC family of nations, several international and regional bodies, and we have received much from the human race, from the gifts, from the discoveries, inventions, the fruits of human genius over the centuries. And we also believe that Bhutan may have something small to contribute to the global community. And the global community has been very positively disposed towards the message of Bhutan, like gross national happiness. And as Honorable Tamsri would know, in 2011, the General Assembly of the United Nations Organization, without a dissenting voice, all the 193 members decided that Bhutan's proposal to make pursuit of happiness a global agenda was adopted without a dissenting voice. And the 20th of March now is celebrated as the International Day of Happiness. So, in terms of trade and economic cooperation, we have benefited much. So many countries from around the World Bank have helped Bhutan to develop economically. But we also believe that we have to make our priorities clear. Which areas would Bhutan need supporting? Critical areas where we do not have much expertise. There was a time when Bhutan used the term development aid, aid necessary to develop Bhutan. But over time, we also started talking about aid development. Aid development would mean that our development partners would be mindful of the specific needs of Bhutan and accordingly plan development assistance to suit the needs of Bhutan. So far, it's been such a beautiful cooperation between Bhutan and the different countries of the world and our close neighbors, as well as the international bodies. So, Bhutan is a deeply inward looking country, but we are also a member of the global community, and we want to play our part, as a member of the global family of nations. So we are not stuck in a time warp. We are not stuck in a time warp. We would like to be. We would like to. We would like to receive from the global community, as well as give to the global community what little we may have in terms of our goodwill, in terms of our message, and in the efforts to make our world a little more peaceful and a little more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. You have been most wonderful. We have spent a good time this afternoon listening to you, and of course, the question that were posed to you. But unfortunately, I must say sorry to all the participants who have posed question. But
I am the guilty person.
No,
I should have allowed more time.
not
I
at
went
all.
on and on.
But I think let Vinish from the Secretariat, if possible, just collect the question and post to you, and perhaps you can email to them. That'd be very useful. But more importantly, I think despite not giving time to our participant, to me, I think we have enjoyed the talk by you, Your Excellency. We have learned so much about the gross national happiness index in Bhutan. I know it's an ongoing process, and there's so much to learn from the Bhutanese experience. And the connection that you made between the gross happiness measure in Bhutan and our SEJAHTERA may mean a lot of things to people who are involved in this area. And there are many of us, educationists, academic community, are involved in these important issues. And we have, as you said, to face the challenges that are sometimes beyond us, the challenges from the globalization process and so on. And last but not least, Your Excellency, we would like to record our sincere and a big thank you to you for spending the time to us. And I hope one day, many of us can visit Bhutan and see what has been done in terms of being happy citizens of the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Your Excellency, and hope to see you someday.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Maybe on my part as well, I would like to express my deep, deep gratitude to my very, very gracious hosts, the University of SEJAHTERA and the Asia Metropolitan University, and all of you from different parts of the world who have attended this session. And thank you so much for the good words and the
Okay,
kind
thank you.
thoughts.
Thank you
And
so much. Thank you.
I would like to wish all of you much happiness and good health.
Yes.
Once again, thank you so much in this for the joy.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Before we close, perhaps, can I call Mr. Subra to give a few words on behalf of Tan Sri Palan and the university?
Yes, Excellency and Tan Sri, I think it was an exciting and a wonderful session. We enjoyed the concept. We also learned new things, and the response was good. And we have almost 40 questions,
Yes.
And I think that shows that how many of them, they're really curious, and listen to your session is really very good. And also we like to take this opportunity for Thakur Zul, who have, linked us to Your Excellency, and also Tan Sri Zul's model on the spice and the rest. And we really appreciate you. And thank you very much, Excellency and Tan Sri.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. But if somebody has questions, they can be mailed to me as well.
Yeah, that would be very good. Yes. Thank you so much once again, Your Excellency.
Thank you so
and of course,
much.
the Secretariat and
Thank you, Tan Sri.
Mr. Subra and all the participants from all over the world. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.